So you're just driving along, minding your own business, when you go to turn the steering wheel and you hear that noise. That clack, clack, clack is characteristic of a failed CV joint. In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the axle in a Volkswagen Passat, Audi A4, A6, A8, or similar model. If your car has a center cap, first you need to remove that. This isn't the style that I can pick out, so you have to remove the wheel and punch it out from behind. If your center cap looks more like this, you can just pry out the plastic center cap and then you have access to the axle right away. Now, before we get started, safety first. Apply the parking brake, chalk the wheels, and refer to your factory service manual for the location of the correct jack points. Never get under the car if it's being moved or raised. Don't get under the car until it's securely supported with stable jack stands and wheel chocks. If you're not 100% sure how to safely raise and support your car, have an experienced helper assist you or bring it to a shop. After you've loosened the lug nuts on the ground, jack up the car. A lot of German cars use lug bolts instead of lug nuts, so I like to use this wheel hanger to prevent the wheel from hanging down. A lot of times it can bang into the dust shield and scrape off the balancing weights. Then remove the lug bolts. This year model of Passat uses a 17 Allen head bolt. Most cars will typically use a 27 to 32 millimeter spindle nut. Now this bolt is exposed to the elements, so take a screwdriver and scrape off all the dirt and rust that may be inside the head. You want to make sure that the socket is fully seated. Now these bolts are really tight, so make sure to use a breaker bar, a good quality socket, and VW tool PIPE available from your dealership for $300 probably, and lefty loosey, righty tighty. Once you've removed the wheel and triple checked that the car is safely secured and supported by jack stands, here's a little more detail on the wheel hanger I was using earlier. You can fully remove this lug bolt or spindle nut. Some spindle nuts are secured by a cotter pin. If they are, just remove it. Now I'm only going to remove this a little bit, and the reason why is because it can help push the axle out. So just go like this, and there you can see it move. Now that I know that this is nice and loose, I'm just going to remove this fully. No need to have it in there. If you have a spindle nut, I suggest threading the spindle nut on so that the front face is even with the threads. Then you can use that to help prevent deformation of the threads while you push it out. If the shaft is really stuck, take some penetrating lube and spray it around the splines here to help add some lubrication and push it out. One optional step on this model is pulling out the ABS sensor a little bit. If your new parts have the tone ring on the axle, this applies to you. This tip does not apply to Jetta Golf Sport Wagon and many other car makes and models that have the tone ring on the wheel bearing housing, because it's out of the way. If the axle gets really crooked when you're inserting or pulling this out, this tone ring could actually damage the ABS sensor. I mean, you could also damage the ABS sensor in the act of pulling it out if it's really seized in place. So whether you want to pull it out or not is up to you. Here's a steer knuckle out of the car for illustration. This is where the brake calipers were, this is where the lower ball joints were, and here's the ABS sensor. The wire feeds through the steering knuckle and it just press fit into this pod here. Here's a close-up of the ABS sensor area. You can kind of see it sticking through this little hole. The way it works is that it measures this tone ring as it's turning to measure wheel speed, and that regulates the ABS system. To remove this, you just turn it and pull. Note how far it's inserted, because if you insert it too far, it could make contact with this tone ring and actually become damaged. So as long as you don't, insert the axle crooked or knock this up, it should be fine. If you don't remove it, if you want to play it safe, you can pull this out just maybe a centimeter or so while you insert the axle like this, and then when you're done, push it back to the same depth. This model has a sound and dust shield over here, so I'm going to remove that, carefully noting any kind of clips here. and it's snaked around the brake lines and a bunch of other stuff, so I'm just going to be careful in pulling it out. Now these bolts are exposed to the elements, so I'm just going to give them a little bit of a squirt with some PV Blaster or liquid wrench to help loosen them up. Now to remove the axle. To remove the entire axle from the car, first loosen the inner side of the axle. Many German cars bolt the inner CV joint to a flange. This one is held by 6 10mm triple square bolts. Now some axles extend into the differential. In those cases, if they don't have these bolts, most of the time you can just pry it out once you've freed up the axle outer joint. They'll be held with a C-clip on the shaft, and pulling them out will just pop them off. Don't try that on this car, because this flange is held with a bolt underneath the inner axle, which must be removed to remove this flange that is sticking out of the differential. Use some extensions to get the socket onto these bolts, and make sure that it's fully seated. Again, these are exposed to the elements, so you want to make sure that they are fully seated and won't strip this out. I like to get them loose with hand tools so that I can inevitably strip them out later with an air wrench. There we go, now it's loose. I've removed all the inner CV joint bolts. When you do this, sometimes you have to rotate the wheel, just put it in neutral, rotate the wheel to get better clearance to the other bolts. I've also turned the wheel all the way to one side for better clearance. This way, it gives me a little bit more room to maneuver the axle out. Now that the inner CV joint is loosened and this bolt is removed, there's nothing holding this in. You just have to press this forward while maneuvering this end around to get it out. So now that this is loose, I can just pull this out, maneuver this around, and if you maneuver this around enough, you can just remove the driver's side axle on this car just like that. The official method to get clearance to remove the CV joint or axle on this model multi-link suspension is to remove this pinch bolt. This holds the upper suspension arms in place. I wouldn't do this for a few reasons. First, the axle can be easily removed by turning the steering wheel and maneuvering it out. Some people also crack the steering knuckle trying to get the upper arms out. If you insist on removing the upper arms, you can loosen them up here. Make sure to tighten these arms with the suspension in the resting position, or else these bushings will be preloaded and fail early. You can also loosen this lower rear ball joint, but there's no room for a pickle fork, and these will pretty much be seized in place. Most cars use a strut suspension, and probably the easiest way to get clearance is to loosen the lower ball joint and pop the ball joint out. On some cars where the ball joint is held onto the lower control arm, it's easier to loosen the ball joint control arm bolts. Make sure to index their exact position with some paint or something so that your alignment is usable when you put it back. If you just remove the ball joint from the spindle, you should not need an alignment. On the passenger side on this particular model, there's a heat shield held in with 3 Allen bolts. If you want to maneuver the axle out, remove these 3 Allen bolts, and then remove the heat shield. Here's the passenger side axle. In this case, I'm going to move this up to the front, towards the front of the car, and wiggle this out. Be careful not to damage the ABS sensor. And there we go. Here's the old joint and the new joint for comparison. As a rule of thumb, always check the make and the length of the drive shaft. Earlier when I was checking this, I can actually feel play in here, which means that it's pretty darn bad. Here is the good axle where it's nice and tight. As you can see, the boot had split and thrown its grease, which let in contaminants, and the lack of lubrication plus contaminants equals boot CV joint failure. Here's a new axle. I suggest doing some research and finding an OEM supplier for the original axle because they'll be better quality. I strongly suggest that you not buy aftermarket brand replacement axles from the local auto parts store because those are all regrinds. A regrind is when they take the used axle that you give them back and cut into the wear surfaces of the used joint and fit in oversized bearings to make it work again. The failure rate of those is surprisingly high. When they regrind it, sometimes this can even cut into the hardened layer of metal, and I support the local auto parts store, but I won't buy used axles or alternators from them because those tend to have a fairly high failure rate. A lot of people replace the whole axle if you just need a boot or joint because they'll see, oh well, the used axle from the auto parts store comes with a lifetime warranty. Well, the wholesale price of reground axles is around $12. You can't even ship it back to the factory that it came out of for that amount. So I don't know what kind of value you can expect from it. I've also noticed that OEM axles are hollow and a lot of regrinds on this model are solid and not very well balanced. In addition, here, even though this was a rebuilt, not a reground, but a rebuilt axle, this is still rust free. The overseas axles tend to have exteriors which rust pretty fast for some reason. Lastly, on this model of Volkswagen, Passat, and Audi, cheap axles are notorious for causing vibration at idle by bad inner joints. Most people mistake it as a bad motor mount, but I've helped a lot of people diagnose this problem who have these models. I ask them if they just change the axles and they respond, yes, but it's an engine vibration. It's actually a driveline vibration caused by low quality inner joints. I'm also going to review the driveaxle.com rebuilt, not reground axle. It came with all new hardware for the inner joint. This bolt that holds the axle on, this is a single-use bolt and it costs $20 from Volkswagen alone. The two special tools in case you don't have them to remove the axle. A return shipping label for the axle core, and even a printout for the local UPS store. Their axle uses brand new inner and outer CV joints and reuses a good used OEM axle. Here you can even see the OEM Volkswagen Audi part number here. On my car, only the outer CV joint is bad, and I was only going to replace this CV joint, but the price of the Volkswagen branded joint from the dealership is ridiculous. The OEM supplier who makes these is about the same price as buying a brand new whole axle from Raxles, and it'll save me the mess with a high quality axle. Before I got this, I asked Raxles how he's able to sell this at a competitive price, and he said that they can buy the joints in bulk because they just do axles. They've got a great reputation for a quality product, and so far the support and the presentation of this is excellent. If you only want to replace the CV boot or joint, also see my other videos for details on that. I'm just going to shoot some brake cleaner through these holes to clean out any kind of stuff that might be clogging up the threads. Then maneuver the new axle in. One nice thing about the Raxles replacement part, they gave me this replacement hardware, and it even includes torque specs. I recommend tightening them, hand tight, then wrench tight in a star pattern. This will help prevent these bolts from loosening up and the axle flying out while you're driving. The rest of installation is the reversive removal. If you're wondering why there's a screwdriver here, it's because I used it to counter hold the axle while I was tightening the inner CV joint bolts. And just use a sturdy screwdriver, stick it in the vented brake disc, and it can counter hold quite effectively and safely. The hardware that holds the axle to the hub is almost always a single-use fastener, so make sure to use a new one during installation and torque it to your proper factory torque specs. This is not something you want coming loose. On this model, the factory torque spec is 140 foot-pounds, and then you tighten it another 180 degrees. So I'm going to once again use my breaker bar and my trusty Volkswagen Super Special tool, and note the angle. Reinstall the wheel sender cap and then go for a test drive. For this exact model, or if you just want to learn more, make sure to read the article linked in the description below. And feel free to use the PayPal donation button there. Donations are much appreciated. So thank you in advance, or at least like the video. Also check out my website, myturbodiesel.com. to receive your free cake.